last topic to talk about here came out on Super Bowl Sunday as well. Deebo Samuel essentially asking for a trade from the San Francisco 49ers. Look, we had a lot of talk about Deebo and would they sign him a couple years ago? Was he on the trading block last year? And now, look, the Niners have a lot of guys to pay, including Brock Purdy coming up very shortly here, assuming they're going to get that deal done. And so might be the right move for San Francisco. And Deebo's lost a little bit of his shine these last couple of years. And a big part of his shine was his versatility, ability to play running back and be a versatile piece. Does a new team have to do that with Deebo Samuel? Interesting trade piece, though, for San Francisco here.
It is, yeah. I mean, Deebo, I think, had a massive decline this year. Like, obviously, the 49ers generally did. Like, they were not as good. They missed a lot of players. But this was the first year where you're like, Deebo being in the lineup doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. Whereas previously, it's been huge. I understand there were other players missing as well. This is kind of the problem with the 49ers is there's always these confounding variables like who moves the needle the most? Is it Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams, Brandon Ayuk? Well, like all of them were missing at various points of this season. So trying to unpick which one was the guy that moved the needle, and the chances are it's not any one of them, it's all of them to varying degrees. And, you know, when you start combining it, it has this compounding effect. But generally, Deebo, like this is one of the worst seasons, if not the worst he's had, and he didn't look like this complete game-changing, you know, weapon X that offense has had that can be deployed everywhere, that causes defenses all kinds of problems. Like, they would be selling low, getting rid of him at this point, and yet, given his contract, given he wants out, you might have to do it anyway.
And they also structured the deal so that it would be over $30 million in dead money if there's a trade or release right now, and 4 void years in there. This is his last real year of his contract. It's kind of a weird spot for San Francisco. And it goes back to this idea. Anytime a good player's up, we're always like, sign him, right? And it's like, great, yeah, that makes sense until they get upset and want to trade. And, you know, just like Myles Garrett asking for a trade with the Browns, that's all well and good, but depending on when the trade is asked for, it could be really bad for the team trading them, right? Like, you know, if Myles Garrett asks for this trade maybe a year from now, it's less dead money and they can maybe get more of a haul for him. Deebo's in the spot where the trading team gets a great deal. They basically get him on the cheap, but the Niners would have to eat a whole lot of dead money here.
Well, it's the one problem with quote unquote team friendly contracts, right? Like, it's great to sort of win the negotiations, if you like, and get a team friendly contract. But the one issue with that is at some point during a team friendly contract, a player goes, this is bullshit. Why am I playing for this amount of money? I want a new contract. And then you have to re-up them. Whereas if you'd let the player win, you know, the first time around, he's potentially happier with his contract in the first place, and that lasts longer. It sometimes it's a false economy to sort of win the negotiation and end up with this contract that a player ends up getting sick of a couple of years into it. Like Myles Garrett, I think that contract is so prohibitive to trade that the solution ends up being the Browns give him a new, you know, best paid defensive player in football type of contract and keep him in the building. Now, does that happen if he's on a better contract or a contract that he would be happier with now? Who knows? But like, that's the issue with some of these things is what can be great for the team in the short term actually ends up coming back to bite them. It's like the one area where players have the leverage, right? You know, in you don't have the fully guaranteed deals, blah, blah, blah. Teams can cut you, move on from you. But the one kind of spot where players are able to fight back is, well, if you thought you won the contract the first time around, two years into this, I'm going to start agitating for a trade or a new deal, and then you have a pain to deal with.
Yeah, it's not like in baseball, it's all guaranteed money, and if you trade a guy, you just trade the contract, and it's like a salary dump. And a lot of teams do a bunch of salary dumps when they want to reset. In football, you don't have the salary dump option necessarily because you're on the hook for the bonuses, and that's where it is more difficult. And again, when a player is a couple years into his contract and then he's asking for a trade, it ends up, you know, putting some more pressure on the team to get rid of him. So any thoughts on Deebo and a fit or a landing spot? I did see, I can't remember who mentioned, I think it was like the one decent tweet that RG3's had in the last 3 years. He said the Broncos said they need a joker, and Deebo Samuel's a joker. Now, I think they were talking more about a tight end joker, right? The old, like, this is a inline tight end, movable chess piece, Tyler Warren in the draft type of player. But the way Sean Payton was really creative offensively last year with guys like Marvin Mims, would they tap into Deebo's skill set at this point?
I was going to say, don't they already have it in Marvin Mims? You want to try and lose Marvin his job?
No, of course. Well, they could let Marvin be the deep threat that he should be. They should be chucking it deep to him a couple times a game because Bo Nix, we know, could throw the ball 65 yards in the air. So maybe Deebo could help run game, pass game, maybe in Denver.
I mean, for years, people have been connecting all of the San Francisco wide receivers with Pittsburgh, and I think that does still fit. Like, this is a team in Pittsburgh who still have a question mark at quarterback, obviously. They've got George Pickens as like their one consistent high-end wide receiver, but I don't want to say limited, but he has a very specific skill set. Like, he's not a complete all-around wide receiver who can win in every different area. He has a very specific role. So adding different skills to that receiver core is, I think, a good thing, regardless of who the quarterback ends up being. It's a good thing if you end up getting a new high-end quarterback who can now take advantage of these weapons. It's also a good thing if you have a limited quarterback who needs to be propped up by the receiving talent around him. Like, if it's just George Pickens doing the propping, that's an issue. If it's George Pickens plus a Deebo who also adds dynamism to your backfield, it's a little bit stale. I think Deebo does still fit in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from Deebo. I don't think he's just a gimmick player. But I don't think if you were just isolating his wide receiver skills, you're putting him in the top 15 or so. Like, maybe the total package, but it's taken a bit of a hit the last couple of years. But when you get the ball in his hands, he's unbelievable. Use him on screens and underneath stuff. You can put him in the backfield, as we know. And he's a good enough route runner. But again, I don't think he's like your high volume number 2 opposite a number 1 necessarily. But he could be good in that role. So I think he's like a high end 2. And maybe a compliment to Pickens if he's still in Pittsburgh. Does make sense.
The question is also, like, what does Deebo want? Because I think you're right. Like, obviously, you are not tapping into the full breadth of his skill set if you're saying, okay, he's just going to be a wide receiver for us. Like, he's never going to take a backfield snap. I think he would still be functional and actually pretty good in that role. And to be honest, I think he kind of gets underrated as a wide receiver because of what he does in the backfield. But clearly you're leaving meat on the bone if you're doing that and not tapping into that skill set as a runner. On the other hand, I think in his past, he has already kind of agitated or made this point. Like, running backs have shorter shelf lives than wide receivers, right? It's a more attritional, more, it breaks bodies down faster, right? So if you're a player who has this sort of hybrid role where you're going to get used as a wide receiver, use a running back, those running back plays are taking more of a toll on you than the wide receiver plays are. That's just the nature of the game. So if you're Deebo, in terms of longevity, in terms of making money, in terms of, maximizing your NFL career, you don't want to play as a running back. That's not helping. That's potentially shortening your career. It's not the bang for the buck in terms of ROI, right? But it is maximizing your threat to a defense on any given play. So, I mean, one of the questions immediately for any team thinking about trading for him is, are you happy with the current situation, right? If we deploy you in a similar way to San Francisco, wide receiver and running back sort of matchup problem, is that okay? Or are you like, no, I want to play wide receiver and nothing else? Because that, I think, would change, well, number one, how valuable you think he is, and number two, which teams would be potentially interested in him. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.